Hi, everybody. Kevin Longquist here for On the Pony Express, and we are here with our Hilltop visits on this significant day in SMU history, July 1st, 2024, when SMU officially becomes a member of the Atlantic Coast Conference. And how fitting that we are here in Dallas Hall, the signature building here on the campus of SMU. And we are pleased to be joined by University President Dr. Argel Turner. Dr. Turner,
Thank you.
thank you so much for being with us today.
Glad to do it. Glad to do it.
Let's start with this monumental day in this university's history of becoming a member of the ACC. And if you would put into context what this day means for this university and its future.
Obviously, our communities look forward to this day for a long time. I got here in 1995, the last year that we were in the Southwest Conference. And so from 95 on, we've certainly been building up all of the infrastructure of things. And it's just a great celebration of all the efforts that we've put into our athletic program being matched with all the efforts that we've been success we've put into the academic programs. And so now finally we're in a conference that we think matches our academics as well as our athletics. And so it feels very good, but it's a historic day. There's no question about it.
I want to go back to the night before when North Carolina State flipped its vote to yes. There were reports of straw polls, if you will, indicating that there wasn't enough support. Could you share with us what you, the other leadership, David Miller, what you were dealing with on August 31st with this kind of tension? Were you trying to lobby other schools? Could you lobby other schools? Or were you just at the mercy of what that vote on September 1st was going to be?
Well, in some ways, we were at the mercy of that vote, but that didn't keep us from. Rick Hart was checking with a lot of ADs. I was calling presidents that I knew that were sympathetic to us and supportive of us. And I know David was in touch with some trustees and donors to some of those schools. And so we were very much trying to find a way that we might encourage North Carolina State or even Chapel Hill to change their vote. We knew that the other two wouldn't. And so the idea that we had to have one of them was just overpowering. And so in a situation like that, you do everything that you think might be having even a chance of being effective and helpful. And so that's what we were doing. The three of us from the very beginning said, here are our groups that we're working with, and let's stay in touch.
Did you all believe that this was SMU's last chance to get into a Power 5 conference, given the climate of where things were going in college athletics? What did you all think of that?
We never viewed it as the last chance, and I wouldn't view it right now as the last chance. There's just too much turmoil in intercollegiate athletics. And so as a result, it was the best chance with the conference that we wanted in. And so we had talked before all this started. Obviously, there were three possibilities. And from the very beginning of that, David and Rick and I all in a conversation together said, if we had our druthers, where would we want? And we all agreed we'd be happy with any of them, but if we had a choice, we'd like to go in the ACC. And the reason was, institutionally, we just matched more of them. And private institutions, high academic standards, and so on. And so we wanted to be in the ACC, but we obviously wanted to be in one of the P5, A5, however you want to denote it. But still, it was quite an opportunity for us. And the one thing that Rich Templeton said as we were talking about, he's vice chair of the board, various opportunities, and we were talking about financially or anything else, doing everything we could. And he said, what you don't want is 3 or 4 years from now, looking back and saying, well, I wish we had just blank. Mm-hmm. And we didn't want to leave any stone unturned, even if it wouldn't have been a very effective effort. When you know that something's coming, when a vote is coming at a certain time, you just have to work right up to that moment.
You, Stanford, and Cal joined a conference where there isn't 100% unanimity between the lawsuits between the ACC, Florida State, and Clemson. I won't ask you to speak to that, but does this university feel a sense of urgency to prove itself in order to help strengthen itself, but also the ACC, because of what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, I think it's important for us, for a lot of reasons, to be as strong as we can, as early as we can be. I don't think any of us think that the competition isn't going to be stiffer. Our schedule next year is probably the toughest schedule SMU's had in 30 or 40 years.
Correct. Yep.
And so as a result, it's going to be hard. But basketball, I mean, if you look, we had 8 championships this year. which tells you that we've got the foundation for a very competitive presence in that whole conference. But that doesn't mean that we'll win it, but it does mean that we intend from the very beginning to be competitive. And I think that's important to the ACC, and it's also important to SMU. There's who knows what's going to happen in 6 months from now. I mean, I've been working in intercollegiate athletics and leadership areas for 40 years, and I really hate that it's come down to a lot of this, but it has. And so you don't rue the day, you try to get in and be effective for the day that you're living in.
You were speaking of a few moments ago about looking at the 3 different conferences, like if we had the choice, where would we go? But the interesting part about the Pac-12 situation was the fact that in early August of 2023, it looked like you were on the precipice of joining that conference, and then their media rights deal fell apart. What was that like to go through that? Because the reports were that if they'd gotten the media rights done, that you were pretty much going to walk into that conference as a member of that. And so just it had to be a strange feeling, but maybe now good because you were still having those discussions with the ACC.
Yeah, and it would have been more disastrous if we weren't involved already with the ACC and to some extent the Big 12. But it would have been a lot harder. But frankly, it was sort of Big East deja vu, you know, yeah. Since we've been through something like that before. And so that makes you even more concerned about it. But that Friday night that they took the vote, from all indications, the next day we'd have been a member. And when it started kind of unwinding, well, then it just made us very quickly say, okay, we've got to work even harder and work with our consultants on how to approach the ACC.
This journey that SMU has been on for P5 status has been essentially covered 2 decades. I mean, we can talk about maybe the early aughts and then going into the 2010s. And while there was some athletic success, it wasn't robust as other schools moving from G5 conferences to Power 5 conferences like TCU or BYU. And of course, with SMU doing what it did this year with 8 conference championships, huge feather in their cap with the momentum it takes into the ACC. But what do you think was at the heart of SMU's strategy, and if you will, the presentation, to make the case that it could be a bona fide member of a P5 conference?
It's been a long process, as you said. When I got here in '95, I just couldn't believe how poor the facilities were. We were playing football down at the Cotton Bowl. Students had to get into a bus to go down there. Even when we were out at Texas Stadium, the same thing occurred. The university wasn't getting anything. That's an overstatement. The university was getting very little out of playing intercollegiate football that way. I'd come from Ole Miss, where the Grove and everything, to every time you had a home game, it was a huge event for the campus, and it recruited athletes and non-athletes. So it was very obvious to me at the very beginning that we had to have a new facility. And talking with Clark Hunt and Ray and Nancy Hunt, and we put the story on the front of our stadium, just how that happened. But that was the first thing we had to do. And then basketball. We needed the Moody Foundation to do something. So, and soccer, I mean, it looked like we had a high school stadium, and I could go on and on. We didn't have anything for golf. Tennis was, non-existent practically. I mean, and those are not big sports, but they speak to how the university feels about sports, in which, given our clientele, quote unquote, we should have good facilities. I mean, we have enough people that have financing to have those kind of facilities. And so it became clear that the facilities had a lot to do. And so if you looked at what we sent out now, it had a lot to do about facilities. And I think doing the Weber End Zone project was the coup de grace. I mean, the stadium, Ford Stadium, was great. It was copied by a lot of different places and building stadia. But we needed to close in the end zone. The fact that the end zone wasn't enclosed to some of those A5 schools meant that it wasn't sufficient.
Right.
And so we led with the Weber when we were talking about it. And then we talked about all the other facilities. And once we got people to come and look at them, just like for our academic facilities, people go, oh my word, I had no idea. And that was one of the reasons George Kliavkoff, who was the commissioner of the Pac-12, came here, and that was his huge response and why he was so supportive of us. And once we got people to come, which they were hesitant to do because they knew the press was looking, but once we got them to come, they were impressed.
I want to go back to when you first arrived at SMU in 1985. There was still that hangover from the death penalty. As I shared with you, I was a student during that time. There appeared to be a sense of uber cautiousness about allowing football and other athletics to have a presence again. And what did you encounter when you first arrived, and what did you believe was the path for athletics to eventually reach that status to where we are today, moving into the ACC?
Well, there was so much that had to be done, including, I mean, the stadium is just one part of it. The requirement that student athletes be admitted to the university before they could be really brought to campus just totally handicapped the coaches of that era. I mean, it just simply wasn't any way to be competitive in our recruiting. So I worked with the faculty senate chair and some of the leaders of the faculty senate to basically work out a huge data analysis of athletes that had been here for the last 20 years, looked at their scores, looked at their GPAs in terms of their likelihood to graduate, and we came up with a cut score on the SAT and the ACT and a GPA in certain courses, and then they could be brought to campus whether they had gone through the admission process or not, if they met that high school requirement. So that helped tremendously. And then from one thing to another of reviewing what it took to be successful academically here. So things have been kind of turned over to the faculty in a way that just precluded us from being able to recruit competitively. And so the faculty then worked with us, and it took several years before we could be competitive.
I want to ask you about your $1.5 billion Ignited campaign, something that you had a great interest in, a great vested. The university has had great success with that, but the timing of that, what has that meant, especially with the ACC now joining the ACC? What has that meant to have that campaign be running basically in concert with it?
It has been tremendous because we were able to say not only are we doing things athletically, but look at what else is going on academically, and that what we're doing athletically just fits in with what we're doing institutionally. And so the timing of it was frankly perfect.
With the ACC, there have been discussions about, or have there been discussions about this university maybe expanding undergraduate student enrollment? What's been the discussions about that, if any, to this point?
Well, there hadn't been any discussions with the ACC. We have been slowly increasing the first year class now for about 10 years. It was 1,200 back in 2005, 6 in that area, and so now we're 1,600 first year class. We intend to move it up some, but there are schools. Our first year class is not that much smaller than a number of those schools over there, Wake Forest in particular, and even Duke from that standpoint. We intend to get a little bit bigger, but over each year. But the size of the university is not nearly as important as how much support it has.
Sure. As we close, obviously getting into the ACC, one of the defining moments, one of your proudest moments here as university president, maybe one or two others that you would define as kind of like you've been most gratified with.
Well, we had so much competition to get the Bush Presidential Center, and it got so intense because of our inability to close out some real estate that would be necessary or useful for that. Once that was placed here, we felt awfully good about it. And so in terms of just sheer achievement, that's been a very significant one too, just like getting that call from the ACC.
Absolutely. You've been more than gracious with your time. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. You bet.
For Dr. R. Joel Turner, I'm Kevin Longquist. We'll see you for On the Pony Express Hilltop Visits next time.